Hello and welcome. I'm Vivek, and you're listening to HackerRank Radio, a podcast spotlighting top engineering leaders who discuss the challenges and opportunities that exist today in building and developing world-class engineering teams. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be starting a new mini-series titled Making Remote Work. The purpose of the series is to help companies and hiring teams navigate through the new reality of running and hiring teams remotely. In each episode, we'll speak with a leader from companies who are already leading the way in remote work. Our first guest for today's episode is Andy Mountney, the talent acquisition site lead at Atlassian. In our conversation, Andy and I will cover how Atlassian approaches remote hiring. We're living in super tough times, actually a unique time that we don't even have like a particular playbook to mitigate the situation of what's happening right now. We're all working from home globally across the world, across our company. We are doing our best to help our customers during this time. Specifically, the areas that we can actually do a really good job or that we can really help our customers is on remote hiring. For companies that are actually hiring, everything is going to be done remotely, from your on-site interviews that were supposed to be in person, now is on virtual. How do you close candidates, onboarding, like everything is going to be remote. And we want to make sure that we can help our customers during this time. Now, you've been doing remote hiring and remote interviewing way before any of this pandemic started. So, who better to get like advice and tips from? So maybe before we jump in, you could probably share a little bit about yourself, your work at Atlassian, and maybe even about Atlassian.
Thanks, Vivek, and appreciate taking the time today. So I'm Andy Mountney. I'm the recruitment site lead or talent acquisition site lead for Sydney for Atlassian. That means I look after the teams that do experienced hire recruiting for our Sydney office, which is our flagship headquarters. But obviously, we've got offices in a number of different locations around the world, a range of offices in the United States, a very fast-growing office in India and Bengaluru, and a number of other locations as well. So in different parts of our organization, we have been delivering remote interviewing for different role types for a long time. Australia is far away from where a lot of our talent is who we hire, as well as having the opportunity to hire locally. We bring a lot of talent to Sydney as well. So we have a precedent and we're used to interviewing people remotely. As an organization, our tools are all about collaboration, and our mission is to unleash the potential in every team. So when you think about how we work together, we're fortunate that our products help us facilitate that in many ways, whether you're an engineer and using Jira, or whether you're someone perhaps in the talent acquisition team using Trello or Confluence, that those products are very much about enabling teams to work together, to be consistent and collaborative. So we're fortunate that our tools help us nudge us on that journey in the first place, and hopefully do so for some other teams as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're big fans of Jira and Confluence.
We're fans of the tool and always welcome some rich feedback.
Andy, maybe I want to structure this into three parts. One is, what do you do pre-interview in a remote setting? Everything is under the envelope of remote setting, but what do you do in a pre-interview? Yep. What do you do during the interview? And what do you do post the interview, which is like, how do you close candidates and others? So maybe just on the three parts of it, can you talk a little bit about, on the first part, how do you prepare candidates for this, as well as how do you prepare interviewers for this as well? Do you give them a rubric? Do you give them a scorecard? Maybe you can have this like a two-pronged answer that you can share on candidates and interviewers.
Of course, I think, Vivek, the really important thing to think about from my perspective before you even start on that journey about what does that look like remote is remembering about consistency of experience. So our approach to remote interviewing is that the experience for remote candidates and remote interviewers should be as consistent and similar as it would be for somebody coming to an on-site interview. That's obviously born out of having an infrastructure which supports remote interviewing most of the time in business as usual. But certainly for anyone who's thinking about remote interviewing at the moment, preparing both those parties to be able to deliver the same experience as best we can is super important. So that pre-interview phase is important. I'll dive a little bit into what I mean by that for both parties. So expectation setting, I think, is really important. There are some advantages to being remote as a candidate and sometimes as an interviewer. Familiarity is one. If we look at this purely through the lens, as we should do here, of the technical interview or technical candidates, familiarity with the IDE that you're going to operate in or the tools that you're going to use for the interview is really important. So if we take a step back and think about that preparation phase, it comes from a number of different angles. So we, from a recruiting team perspective, through both our recruiters and our amazing colleagues in our scheduling and enablement team, prepare consistently our candidates for the process. So we have consistent messaging and we have consistent content that we supply to those candidates ahead of the interview. There's very limited change to what we're supplying, whether someone's coming on site or whether someone's delivering their interview remote, because we want that to be consistent. Things I call out that I think are really important. They're probably basic things that are important to any interview. Preparation's an obvious one. Typically, if you were going to an interview as a candidate, you're going to prepare for going to a physical place, and you're going to think about perhaps your journey there. You're going to think about making sure I turn up on time and knowing my route there. You're probably going to think about what's the setup going to be when I get there, and you're going to want to know something about that. Now, a lot of companies these days will provide videos, they'll provide virtual office tours, something that we're currently scaling as we can't bring people on site. It's also important if you're interviewing remote as a candidate to take that step back and just think about the environment that you're going to deliver your interview in. So the setup of your laptop and your computer, are you in a space that you're comfortable with? Did you set that up beforehand, or are you rushing to do that 5 minutes before you're about to go online and join the Zoom call? Obvious thing immediately there as well is, have you got Zoom or your video interview facilitation tool set up already, or are you rushing to do that just prior to the interview? So these are things that are kind of top of mind, is just that preparedness. I think it fits for both the on-site and for the remote interview, but it's sometimes a little bit easier to forget that preparedness element when we're sat at home in a familiar environment.
So I'm assuming you provide like a checklist of things. Hey, candidate, before you're ready for the interview, here is like a to-do list, or here's a checklist of all the things that you need to be prepared with.
It's brief and it's simple. It talks about getting ready, having your environment set up, being in a place that's comfortable, being comfortable yourself. We always say come as you are to an interview, wherever that might be as well. So absolutely, that's the sort of content that we would share with our candidates. You mentioned a little bit about the interviewers as well. Interesting time for us because we have a large population of interviewers who are very used to delivering a remote interview or a video interview, a lot of them in Australia. But even that has changed for them potentially because they're used to coming into an office and into a room that has a button that they can press to get Zoom up on a very big screen. And now they're going to be delivering that interview at home. So very conscious that the experience is different for them. As we've talked about and haven't had yet, is your child going to suddenly rush into the room to say hello in the middle of homeschooling, in the middle of the interview as a candidate or as an interviewer? I think just recognizing that these are things at the moment that are just going to happen and everyone's very comfortable with that.
Yeah. So far, we're doing really good in this interview, in this remote interview. We have no distractions yet so far. Yeah. So that's good. And you mentioned a little bit about the interviewer experience changing a bit because it's going to be on remote. What is the sense that you've got from your interviewers right now? And maybe we'll jump into the second phase right now, which is during the interview piece of it. Like, Atlassian is now even taking remote interviewing even more to a new level with whatever is happening in the world. What's feedback? What do they like? What do they not like? Curious to hear from that.
I think going back to some of the preparedness piece, it's from an interviewer perspective that making sure they're set up in the middle of the day for switching gears and switching is that interviewer mindset, just as they would do in the workplace, but perhaps it's slightly different with their home setup in terms of where they're operating. So just looking ahead and being ready to deliver that interview, I think is really important for them. Again, we're consistent in terms of the information we supply the interviewer. So our interviewers know before they get to that interview, they know who they're going to be interviewing. They will have seen the profile of that individual. They will know the interview they're going to deliver for that person. And, just simple things about, again, the way that our enablement and scheduling team make sure that it's very clear in someone's diary that they've got this coming up. One tip that I love is we give people 10 minutes at the beginning of the interview for setup, effectively, both parties. But we block that time out in the interviewer diary so that they have that 10 minutes to get their brain into the right place to deliver the interview, get their laptop set up, get their tools set up for the interview as well. I think that just really helps calm someone down, get them back into that right place to deliver that as well.
That is a great tip because I was literally talking to a candidate who was doing the job interview and I told them the first thing, hey, as much as we're all trying to have an unbiased approach to hiring, your initial impressions matter a lot. So if you're going to stumble up in your first 5-10 minutes trying to set up and things on those lines, you're off to a little bit of a rocky start. And it's less about bias, but more importantly, dents your confidence from your ability to perform really well. So make sure that you're set up in the right way and ask the tools that the company is going to use during the interview process proactively, because not a lot of companies candidly are like Atlassian, who gives like a briefing doc to a candidate and an interviewer to actually set up. But it's amazing to see that you actually you've thought through all of these things to have like a block. If it's an hour interview, make that hour and 10 minutes or something like that for the 10-minute setup. That's really, really good to hear.
Vivek, just to take a little piece of what you just said as well, I think one thing, these are unique times. I think there's a super high responsibility on interviewers in situations where candidates are getting set up. It doesn't reflect on their performance in the interview. It's not an opportunity in those first 5-10 minutes to prejudge the fact that someone's not ready, potentially as ready as you'd like them to be to deliver that interview. Big responsibility as an interviewer to help calm that person, settle them, help them reset, and be very clear that, maybe I have got 5 extra minutes at the end, or if I can, to carry on if it's taken a little bit longer to set those tools up. It always worries me that that's something that impacts on candidates in interview processes all around the world, just the same as it might somebody who lives in a city where the traffic's very bad and it takes them a little bit longer to get to that interview, and then they're worried when they get there. I think for remote, it's just thinking again about how can I help facilitate something which is possibly a first-time experience for the person on the other end, hopefully less so for the interviewer, to make that as comfortable as possible and ensure that the person is only being evaluated on the skills and the attributes that they should be.
Got it. Makes sense. Super, super good tip. Fully agree on the advice. Moving on to maybe the third part, which is like post-interview. So let's say you've all done the interviews. You used to do 1 or 2 on-sites, right, prior to this pandemic that was happening. What were those 2 on-sites and how is it translated into the remote setting right now?
Good question. So flexibility, I think at the moment is important in terms of the structure. So and historically, depending on where you're interviewing and your availability as a candidate, that flexibility may have been reflected in your on-site experience as well, in terms of whether you're going to go in and try and wrap everything up in one go, or whether perhaps you're going for a technical interview and then coming back to meet a potential hiring manager and values interviewer in our case. So if you then think about the machinations of how that plays out in remote, I think the obvious thing is we're still looking to optimize for time and quality for both the candidate and for the interviewer as well. Certainly from what I've seen, there's that little bit more flex. So whereas a candidate who comes on site might come in and spend a couple of hours interviewing, whether it's for us or with a different organization, and then they're going to go straight into the next set of interviews and could be there over the course of 3 or 4 hours. I think one of the advantages that remote has is that you can build in breaks very comfortably into that process, whether it's hard stops over a course of 24 hours or a longer period of time, or even if it's just that half hour to 45 minutes that you might want to block out, where typically you were trying to fill space if somebody was on site. Now you're actually giving them back that time maybe to reset and prepare for what might be a different type of interview with a manager or a values interviewer. So I think there's a real opportunity there for organizations to think about giving people the right headspace throughout that process to deliver a great interview. So that's one thing that I would encourage anyone to think about.
And what's your prediction like, which is the value fit interview? And I think you call it culture add, if I'm right, culture enhancement.
So if I take it back a step, values fit is not important to us. And if you think about the history of how we talk about diversity and belonging as opposed to, for instance, diversity and inclusion, from a values perspective, we're not looking for people to fit. We're looking for people to share our values, but they can espouse those in very different ways. One of the beauties of working at Atlassian is that our values actually not only allow us, they encourage us to build teams that bring lots of different opinions, lots of people from different backgrounds who traditionally might not be melded into teams together in other companies. So when we think about those values, we're not looking for fit, we're looking for people who deliver and espouse those values in their work and or demonstrate a capability to really grow into those as well and have the learning agility to do that. So when you think about play as a team isn't about fitting into a team. Play as a team is about enhancing a team. It's about bringing the best out of the people around you. And it's about being somebody who, to my mind, is somebody who can put the team first above self-interest. So we're not looking for fit, we're looking for people who make us a collectively stronger organization and collectively stronger group of teams.
Got it. And now that plus the hiring manager interviews and others are being done remotely, which used to be done more like on-site in the current setting, what's your prediction for the future? Do you think you would embrace this more to a deeper degree than what you've already done because of the flexibility and others? Or do you think we'll probably snap back into the original realm of whatever we were doing like 3-4 months back. What's your take on that?
Good question, Vivek. I think one of the advantages that we know historically is that candidates have delivered those interviews remote in certain locations already, the values, the management interview, technical, all of those sides. So in terms of informing significant change right now, it's more enhancing and delivering something that we're used to doing, particularly that phase of the interview. Most of the values interviewers that we have, a lot of our managers, even if they're working in locations where typically we bring people on site, will have done remote interviews. So that's a population that should be comfortable delivering that type of interview, putting that group at ease. I think to your point about 3 or 4 months down the line, will we go back to what we did before? I think one thing I'd always say about Atlassian is the answer will be no, simply from the fact of we always want to learn through an experience. And inevitably, we're going to learn through this experience. We're going to get feedback from our candidates. We survey a lot of them already about the experience. So really fascinated to see what's the impact of going to a remote-only interviewing model for a period of time. What sort of feedback are we going to get? Is there going to be any impact around that? What comments are we going to have about the experience? Because we'll learn from that. Will it enhance or deliver specific changes that we could identify today? Absolutely not. But when we get to that kind of rounding up and getting back in the office and spending time with our colleagues again, I know everyone around the world is looking forward to, it'll be a good opportunity to reflect and understand what the opportunities are, what we could have done better, and what we look like going forward.
Makes sense. And this is like a sudden change that we're all seeing in the world. You gave like amazing amount of advice and tips that you probably already were doing, and now you're just like taking to a new degree. But for a company that has been doing traditional on-site interviews for most part, what do you think are some of the blind spots that they shouldn't ignore? Which is, would you say, hey, make sure that you have a program manager who's actually running all of this to translate everything? What do I have to do as a company immediately to reflect this new reality?
I think preparation is absolutely key. It's an interesting point when we talk about a program manager. I think for us, our enablement team and candidate experience team are the people who really drive that consistency of experience. And if you're fortunate to have that in your team and your structure, you would want that consistency. So the people who are used to setting up and arranging your interviews, used to sending those confirmation emails, you wouldn't want to suddenly change that because you might change out the content and get it wrong potentially. So call on the experience that you've already got, tweak it and make it right. I think one of the real strengths that we had making this pivot wasn't just the fact that we already deliver remote interviewing in so many places. It was the documentation that we had to support it, because it meant we could lift very quickly at scale and build as much consistency into that change for where we were delivering it. So I'd certainly encourage people to document it, think about it, make sure that comms is consistent and to both parties. It's not just your candidates, it's your interviewers as well. Going right back to the top, encourage preparedness in both parties. I think something we haven't touched on is also be clear with your candidates around what the whole process is going to look like as well. So for instance, some candidates might be thinking, is there going to be a time when this is going to pause and I'm going to have to go on site and I'm going to have to wait, or can I still receive a job offer in this situation? We're certainly full steam ahead here and we're hiring at a great rate, but it's important to just make sure that the candidate can understand that there could be an offer coming out of this process still if it's successful. And again, that's potentially going to raise other questions for that person around, are they ready to make that decision and pull the trigger on an offer in that remote setting or not? Now, again, we are used to working with candidates through that process, particularly in Australia and for Trello. But it's a conversation you want your recruiters to be having up top is, will you be ready if we raise that offer to make that? And how can we help you make that decision? You know, things like virtual office tours that might be useful, using some video content that you may have already of your office, something that we've been looking at can really help. So I think just take the time out, document what it's going to look like, have consistency of communication. And I think the final call I'd say is talk to your interviewer community internally, make sure that they're comfortable and make sure that they understand what's going to be going on in the environment where the candidate is not the same as what it might be on site. There might be other distractions there. You have as much responsibility as the interviewer as the candidate does to make it a great experience, to walk them through and make sure they can deliver that interview as best they can, and to not judge them for anything other than the things that you should be thinking about as you interview someone, which is hopefully technical skill, ability to come into your organization and be a great new team member. Values sharing and espousing is obviously great too.
Got it. Hey, Andy, thank you so much. This is like so many nuggets packed into the last 20 minutes. I know you're super, super busy. Really appreciate you taking time off your busy day. And thank you. I'm sure your advice is going to be super helpful. And you might also get 100 or 1,000 emails after this goes live, people asking you for more advice. But thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate your time.
A pleasure. And we're here to help support the ecosystem. So delighted for anything that we can do and anyone that we can help at the moment. So I welcome those emails. If there's that many, it might take me a little longer than usual to get back to them.
Just add all of them to your Jira tickets. That's it. Yeah.
Done.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Vivek.
You've been listening to HackerRank Radio, the podcast dedicated to discussing the challenges and the opportunities in building and developing world-class engineering teams. Brought to you by HackerRank, the developer skills company.